is that the last presidential campaign, as The Economist rightly put it on one of its covers, was a campaign of denial of reality and not a campaign of awakening, of national awakening. Now is the time for the new government to do it, so I wish them good luck.
Any other questions or remarks from the audience?
I have to say that I don't agree with Pierre. I am a social democrat like Kemal. And I want to say one or two things after what I heard this morning. Now, I will shift to French because I think that since I am French, I ought to speak French. And we have this for those who are not at ease with my own language. D'abord, je voudrais dire à Henri qu'il n'est pas exact de dire que la France n'a pas, le gouvernement français actuel, qui est en place depuis 6 mois seulement, n'a pas pris la mesure de la nécessité de diminuer les dépenses publiques. Dans le projet de budget pour 2013, il y a 10 milliards d'euros de réduction des dépenses publiques. Alors, c'est sûr qu'à l'intérieur de ces 10 milliards d'euros de réduction des dépenses publiques, il y a des choix qui ont été faits, c'est-à-dire qu'il y a certains budgets très peu nombreux, l'éducation, la justice et la police qui ont une légère augmentation, mais c'est pris sur les autres. Donc 10 milliards d'euros de réduction des dépenses publiques. Dans les mesures qui ont été annoncées au début de la semaine par le Premier ministre, et que vous connaissez très bien, il y a à nouveau, pour 2014, une réduction supplémentaire de 10 milliards d'euros de dépenses publiques, et ceci continuera pendant tout le quinquennat. Alors, vous émettez l'opinion qu'il aurait mieux valu réduire davantage encore les dépenses publiques plutôt que d'augmenter certains impôts, je le précise, vis-à-vis essentiellement des catégories les plus favorisées. Nous n'avons pas fait ce choix parce qu'il était très important, alors que la croissance est faible en France et que les prévisions de croissance pour 2013 que nous estimons à 0,8% par an, mais qui sont estimées par la Commission européenne à 0,4 seulement, nous avons pensé que la réduction des dépenses aurait été supérieure à 10 milliards d'euros pour l'année prochaine, aurait été récessive, et nous ne pouvons pas courir le risque de plonger la France dans la récession. Car au final, si tous les pays membres de l'eurozone sont en récession, naturellement, personne, y compris l'Allemagne, n'arrivera à résoudre ces problèmes. Donc voilà, je voulais simplement rappeler, le choix qui a été fait n'est pas exact de dire que nous ne diminuons pas les dépenses publiques, mais ce sera fait graduellement avec un mixte, c'est vrai, d'augmentation des impôts et de réduction des dépenses. Alors maintenant, j'en viens à ce que Pierre vient de dire. Je crois que c'est une facilité que de prétendre de mettre tout le monde dans le même sac ces 30 dernières années. Moi, j'ai appartenu à un gouvernement pendant 5 ans, entre 1997 et 2002. D'abord, j'ai négocié le traité de Maastricht, il y a 20 ans. Je sais ce qu'il y a dedans, dans le détail, et je sais que nous avons perdu 20 ans. Si nous avions simplement appliqué le traité de Maastricht, l'eurozone n'en serait pas là, car il y avait des dispositifs de coordination économiques qui n'ont jamais été mis en œuvre. Mais passons. Il y avait en tout cas des critères, pas plus de 3% de déficit public par rapport au produit intérieur brut, pas plus de 60% de déficit public, qui ont été respectés par tous les gouvernements auxquels j'ai appartenu, jusqu'à ce qu'on accède à la zone euro. Et entre 1997 et 2002, c'est-à-dire juste avant que la monnaie unique soit appliquée, le gouvernement auquel j'ai appartenu pendant 5 ans a scrupuleusement respecté ces critères, et même au-delà, puisque nous avons diminué le pourcentage de la dette publique qui dépassait 60% lorsque nous sommes arrivés en 1997 et qui est descendu à 56,5%. Il se trouve que, depuis 2003, la France ne respecte plus les critères de Maastricht. On ne parle même pas des critères du six-pack, du two-pack, etc. Les critères de Maastricht. Donc je pense qu'il y a une responsabilité particulière, mon cher Pierre, des gouvernements de certains gouvernements par rapport à d'autres. Et si nous avons le traité budgétaire, c'est bien parce que la France n'a pas respecté, hélas. Voilà. Donc nous sommes parfaitement déterminés à en effet respecter ces critères et à faire en sorte que la compétitivité de la maison France soit en effet améliorée, parce qu'on ne peut pas se permettre de continuer à perdre des centaines de milliers d'emplois industriels. Voilà, je voulais juste rétablir ça, parce que le lieu n'est pas d'un débat franco-français, mais je ne voulais pas qu'on n'entende qu'un son de cloche de la part des Français qui sont ici, et je voulais quand même redire certaines choses. Alors, il n'empêche que nous devons faire des réformes. Les mesures structurelles qui ont été annoncées au début de la semaine vont dans ce sens. Il y aura une réforme du marché du travail. Henri sait très bien, et Pierre aussi, que les partenaires sociaux sont en train d'en débattre. Et il y aura des décisions qui seront annoncées. Et que, par ailleurs, il est très important de jouer tous les leviers de la compétitivité. Le gouvernement n'a pas ignoré la compétitivité coût, puisqu'il accorde l'année prochaine 20 milliards d'euros d'allègement d'impôts aux entreprises, c'est-à-dire qu'il va plus loin que ce qui avait été demandé par certains experts. Donc voilà, alors ces réformes sont en cours. Je pense qu'il faudra aussi réformer le système de financement de la protection sociale, pour établir l'équilibre des comptes de la sécurité sociale, dont je rappelle que quand nous avons quitté le gouvernement, j'étais en charge comme ministre de l'Emploi et de la Solidarité de cette question. Quand nous sommes partis en 2002, la sécurité sociale était équilibrée en France, y compris les retraites.
Well, thank you very much for your remarks. I think our panelists want to answer. I think it seems there's a need for penalty measures that needs to be enforced for those countries who don't follow the measures. Henri, if you would like to respond.
I'd like to react, if possible, to what Elisabeth Guigou has said, because, I mean, there are some points I agree with and some points where I disagree. When Elisabeth says that public spending is decreasing next year in France, I strongly disagree. It's true that the state is going to spend 10 billion less, but the state is not the only public body spending in France. In France, in 2013, if you add the state budget, what's going to happen in the local administrations and the social security, public spending will increase by 30 billion euros. This is why what I said was the fact that your spending is increasing less than before doesn't mean that you are getting thinner and more efficient. The state is making efforts, I'm not denying that, but the public administrations as a whole are still spending more, and that's the problem. Yeah, that's the problem. On the 20 billion, which are supposed to be, quote, an effort for the competitiveness, I'd just like to complement your question by saying that this comes after a shock in the other direction, which is the shock of the 2013 budget, where you have 20 billion of increases of taxes on individuals and companies. And unfortunately, on money which would have been invested in the real economy. I will give you a very specific test case, because we have made the computation for us, AXA. France is one of our key countries, and we love to be there. We have a global profit of 4 billion. 1 billion after tax comes from France. This billion is achieved after having paid in France 1.8 billion of various taxes, more than in any of the other 59 or 60 countries we are operating in. The budget for 2013 is increasing these taxes by 175 million. And what has been announced the day before yesterday is possibly going to give us back 20 million in 4 years. So, as we say in French, c'est un effort, mais le compte n'y est pas. So, in terms of competitiveness, it's difficult to say, even if I fully recognize that what has been announced the day before yesterday goes in the right direction, because when you stop hitting your head against the wall, you feel better. So, it's going in the right direction, but it's not what's going to solve the issue of this country. We still spend too much, and the level of public spending is still increasing. And these are the numbers. I mean, in the Conférence économique where the economists are speaking, it's a question which has been debated because there was disagreement on it, but the numbers are the numbers. Public spending is still increasing. So that's one thing. Just to change angle, I'd like to come back to one point which has been mentioned in one question and by Kemal as an issue, the savings rate. Kemal was saying that the savings rate is insufficient in Turkey. I fully agree with him, and I'd like to give the example of the European savings rate and speak for a second about risk appetite. One of the advantages of the European economy, when compared with the US, is the importance of the savings rate. The European savings rate is still at a high level, slightly higher than Turkey. So it should be, because the European demography is the demography of countries which are older than Turkey and therefore need less savings because people are already starting to eat some of their assets. This should be a competitive advantage. The key issue is that it's grossly misallocated. Europeans are good savers, poor investors. Americans are poor savers, good investors. Why are we poor investors? Because the combination of prudential regulation, tax systems, and financial education are leading people to prefer risk aversion, immediate liquidity, to long-term investments. And this is, I think, one of the key issues for the European Commission and for the European governments. If you could reallocate a fraction of the European savings towards more long-term investments, infrastructure, equities, the growth would accelerate because the financing of the economy would be better. Most of the time, it's short-term or it's real estate. If you look at the French system, it's a caricature. The only tax-free form of savings is le livret A, which is immediately liquid. It should be absolutely the reverse. I know it's financing social housing in principle, blah, 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 but is social housing a priority when the productive economy is shrinking at that pace, and you could finance social housing in different ways? There are resources to do that. So it was just to make the point that the way you look at the allocation of the savings is critical, and the definition by any society today of its risk appetite is critical. Risk aversion and the principle of precaution are two enemies of growth in Europe. It has gone too far. It has to go slightly in the other direction. Sorry.
Well, Europeans are poor investors and Turks are poor savers, so I see a win-win solution there. Mr. Darwish, what would you like to add, please?
Well, first, I'm so happy that this very good economic discussion is taking place in Istanbul, in Turkey, about the French economy. That's great. That shows we are already quite a way into the European Union. But, and I fully agree, the risk-taking, the strength of the American economy and of some other economies is the ability to take risks, to finance long-term, the equity, the importance of equity in financing, risk capital, and all these things. All this, however, also means that the state and the social system then has to equilibrate the outcomes and protect the vulnerable and so on. Anyway, but I wanted to say one more thing because I think it's very important in the whole debate about Europe and about the future in the next 2 years. China today has a current account surplus of $190 billion and is still, Governor Romney who lost the election, but he said on day one, I'm going to act against China and declare them a currency manipulator, Okay, that was one of his things. And of course, even the Obama administration is continuing to accuse China of having too large a current account surplus. The largest that the Chinese current account surplus ever was, in absolute terms, was $411 billion. Okay, so they've gone down from 411 billion to 190. What is the current account surplus of Northern Europe in the last 12 months? Northern Europe means the Northern European countries, including the Scandinavian countries who are not in the Eurozone. Well, many of you may not quite have that figure in your head, but the current account surplus of Northern Europe in the last 12 months is $525 billion. Larger than the Chinese ever was. Okay? And so I do believe that if we want to have a solution in Europe, we have to remember Keynes. Keynes said that if you have imbalances, both the deficit countries and the surplus countries have to contribute. There is no, inherent virtue in having a surplus. You mentioned the Swedish finance minister. In Davos, one great thing about being in a think tank is you feel very free. In Davos, the question was asked, how can you be, what's the secret? What's the secret of success? What should the whole world, the other countries, look at? And his answer was, well, countries should have budget surpluses and current account surpluses. I did raise my hand and I said, we're not trading with the outer space. We cannot all have a current account surplus. Okay? And so we have to remember that. A lot of the effort in Europe has to come from the south, which for various reasons has mismanaged. I mean, in Greece it was fiscal mismanagement, tax system, that kind of thing, even changing the numbers and not reporting the right number. In Spain, Spain's current account, budget was in great shape, and their public debt to GDP ratio before the crisis hit was 37%, one of the lowest in Europe, fully satisfying the Maastricht criteria, and even now it's only 47%. In Spain, the problem was completely different. It was a crazy real estate boom financed by the private sector and private banks, including very much Northern European banks. So, each country has to make efforts. Spain effort is, the crisis is different. But the North has to make an effort too, to rebalance the whole system. If the whole burden of adjustment in Europe is put on the southern countries, we will have a deflationary Europe, we will have weak growth, we will have problems that go into the whole world economy, and we will have social explosions in countries such as Greece and Spain. So while these countries have to have deep reforms, the North, I'm not saying should pay for their welfare. The North should simply allow Europe a more reflationary overall policy. German wages should increase.
But they are.
They are. Finally. Yeah. Finally. So the balancing is both in North and remember the number. The number is quite shocking. $520 billion current account surplus.
Mr. Darwish, I feel like there is some resentment on German economy here. As one of our participants said, France lost most of their trade to Germans. And I would like to turn to Stefan. What do you say about this issue, for this rebalancing issue, and as the southern countries also lost some trade to Germany? And don't forget, we're on the same boat as Europe is. I mean, German numbers are deteriorating as well.
Right. So let me first say I'm absolutely echoing the statement of Mr. Dervish, what he was just saying, and also what was the remark from the audience. But I must have to say that Germany wasn't doing very well before the financial crisis started. So I think at the beginning of 2000 and the first couple of years in 2000, we were doing pretty poorly. We were not among the or the most productive and best countries within Europe. So this is at that point when we started these labor market reforms and brought down labor market costs. So when Gerhard Schröder, our chancellor at that point in time, made the labor market more competitive, reduced job security also, that that is the other side. But this came at the reduction of the market prices, and this is what then made our products more competitive, and this is why we were exporting more into the peripheral countries. And so I totally echoing the statement that one of the most important issues which have to be dealt with is to reduce the high labor market costs, which then lead to more imports than exports, and then to this high current account deficits in some countries. But I would also like, and I'm also like to add that I absolutely agree with the statement that there is no mutual benefit in having large account surpluses or deficits, and I think one of the ways, or one of the things we have to discuss now is relatively openly, and this also comes back to the point that there is political mismanagement, or we need more or better mechanism on the European level. It's how to deal with the large amounts of debt which now accumulated in the public space in the peripheral economies, for example. I think it's very clear that Greece has no chance of repaying their money back, and the other countries also starting off with a too high level of debt to begin with. So we have to have a clear discussion how this debt can be restructured, and how to allocate the cost at the end of the day. So someone has to pay for that. There's to be taxpayers which have to pay for that. We have to make clear decisions whose taxpayers are the ones who have to pay for that. On one, it is Germany, but also probably that France has to take on more responsibility. But because I think France was also responsible why we're in the mess to begin with a lot of debt coming from the French banks flowing into the economies of the periphery, and then on the other hand having the benefit at the point in time when the financial crisis started, the current basically, and this is the issue with financing the current account deficit with debt, that it's the same problems banks have. Debt has a tendency to run when problems occur. So this is the case what happened after basically after the Lehman collapse in 2008, that investors were pulling out their money out of the periphery. And what happened is that the ECB stepped in with the short-term money, with very low interest money, and currently about 90% of the central bank liability is produced in the periphery, but not in Northern Europe. So they replaced, basically without the ECB, we wouldn't have an interbank market to begin with, and the periphery used the money they could basically print through the ECB to finance further their current account deficit and repay the debt, which is much more expensive, for example, from France. And so there has to be a discussion about how basically we take this all into account when allocating the costs to reduce the overall debt levels in Europe.
What political reorganization is needed to restore trade numbers, growth, and rebalancing as we speak of it, Mr. Klose?
So when you speak about political organization of Europe, I think you need next political organization in order to be efficient. I think there is more or less a consensus that we have been discussing, which is, I don't know if it is several circles, but several levels of European integration with a federal or more integrated Eurozone, which is one level. There will be a space of convergences with a certain number of states who want to join the Eurozone. And you will have a third zone, which will be more or less the single market, in which we will find UK, the UK, but maybe Switzerland and maybe Norway in the next decade. The question is, what democratic institution in front of this new organization? And I think we need to preserve unity and combine diversity. Unity means we need to have a European Parliament, a unique European Parliament for the single market. When you see some countries such as Norway, their political situation is not anymore democratically sustainable because many decisions for the single market impact Norway without Norwegians having a say. And it's a key issue because it provokes nationalism, internal pressure, and that's not good. So I think, in other words, we should integrate in the medium run the European economic area in the EU, which will be, in fact, the third circle. So once you have this European Parliament, you have a specific issue with the Eurozone, because the Eurozone should have a much quicker integration rhythm than other countries. And there, maybe you need a specific assembly, which will be composed of a part of the European Parliament and a certain number of representatives of national assemblies, which will be a specific European Assembly in charge of overseeing the Eurozone issue. In front of that, you need a clear European government. We can say that this could be the Commission. And we need a clear political leadership. And there are several possibilities. Among them, there is a merger of the job of European Commission President and European Council President, which is a possibility in the present Lisbon Treaty. We could do it if we decide it. But we also need to have a much more effective European Commission, which is nowadays a maelstrom without clear leadership, very complex, and with national say is much too stronger. And so we need to refocus the European Commission, maybe with less members, with a certain number of people which are senior commissioner, and with other members which are junior commissioner, so that you may have something which should be much more manageable. Today, our institutions are not manageable at all. So that this issue, and we can do this with small modification of treaty. Another thing is, it's normal we have an important number of treaty modification. If you look at the Indian constitution, which is one of the more difficult, more complex constitution in the world, and it's a federal constitution, so you have very strong state and the federal level. They change twice a year the constitution. Twice a year. So changing constitution is something normal. When we make a treaty change, is something dramatic in Europe. So we should have a thinking on how to make it much more normal, because each time we make a change, we have a big accident risk. And this accident risk has an impact on the vision investor may have for Europe. It provokes pressure and tension between member states, and we are always close to explosion in a time of crisis. So we need to manage this specific issue by finding new way of changing our treaties and make it much more normal. But the key thing is how to make a transition towards that, given that political leadership is weak, given that public opinion is more and more reluctant with regard to the EU. And the fact is, if we want to change or to make Europe more efficient, we need also to build European leaders. European leaders are people who are capable of thinking their national interest, and the European and the global